So much for the 13th century, ladies and gentlemen. What happens, however, in the beginning of the 14th century, 100 years later, is a very quick and abrupt change in the field of metal processing. The smiths, having made big helmets like this one, have come to a conclusion that actually you can cover the whole body of the warrior with metal. So in other words, full metal jacket. What they learned was to make large sheets of metal used to make the so-called blade armor. Initially only elements were employed, like shin protections, elbow protections, initially made of boiled leather with metal elements, only to be replaced by completely, fully metal armor. So what we're going to do now is abolish certain myths associated with plate armor. People might tell you that it weighed 100 kilograms, or that the knights had to be hoisted up in the air to be put into saddle. Well, bullshit. As a matter of fact, the period we're talking about now is the very beginning of the 15th century, the times of the Battle of Tannenberg, for example, 1410. Or, for those more acquainted with the English or French history, the Battle of Azincourt, 1415. This is roughly the type of period armor used in those days. So, well, what I'm gonna do, remove this, and get dressed, and become a little can of sardines for you, and, well, no talking, let's start doing it. Well, as you can see, the Gambeson changes as well. It's much shorter than before. Why? Because of the steel legs, right? We don't need one up till the knee anymore. And again, we're back to the good old chainmail, which has not gone out of fashion. It's still very much used, especially around the areas where you're not covered. So, let's put it on. It's shorter, it's easier to carry, so I'm glad because of these changes. Okay, my noble squire, can you please? At first, we're going to protect my legs. While sitting on horseback, they're pretty vulnerable. Anyway, to tell you the truth, a knight would never go to combat alone. He would go armed. Well, he would never go into combat alone. He would probably go with 2 or 3 men who would be armed with crossbows and with swords and would protect him in case he was in danger. A knight was pretty hard to kill, actually, because he was the equivalent of our modern special forces. Very well armed. What's more, he started to train how to kill people at a very early age. Usually it was the age of 7. So, by the time he was roughly 20, he was very hard to kill. So, knights would die very seldom on the battlefield. They would usually be taken captive, they would usually be taken hostage for ransom. It was much more, it paid much more to take a knight hostage than to simply kill him, because of the money. The exception that was made in 1410, during the Battle of Tannenberg, when the Teutonic Order was made by King Władysław Jagiełło, who said, "Take no prisoners, I want to destroy the power of the order." So during that time, not many prisoners were taken. Most people were simply executed on the battlefield. This was an exception. Alright, now the arms, they were fastened to the gambeson by a series of leather thongs, which prevented them from falling off. And with a series of leather straps. As you can see, I can move around pretty well. As a matter of fact, these armors were not purchased in an armor shop. They were made by smiths, forged, and especially custom made for an individual knight, kind of like a well-tailored suit. If not, they would be extremely uncomfortable to wear. So every single knight had his own custom-made armor. Well, we got something here, which is a breastplate, a very early version of a breastplate, which consists of metal elements covered in leather. So this is like a 14th century invention, which makes it pretty easy to move around as well. This moves. But what we're going to do, I'm not going to put this one on, I'm going to put on a later one. Much more safe, much more flashy and glamorous, and I think it looks cooler on me. Now, this funny shape is constructed especially to protect a knight against the blows of a lance. It protrudes to the front, so in case a lance gets stuck in it, it doesn't actually hit the ribs. This triangular element here prevents the lance from hitting the face. It usually moves to the side, and it finishes right here so I can bend while sitting in the saddle. It's all for horse riding. This kind of armor was not used for foot combat, unless you fell off the horse, of course, and then you were pretty weak. Shoulder pads, the pauldrons, in other words. Yeah, again, it took time to dress a knight up. It took time to get dressed, and that's why a knight never went to war without a squire. It's virtually impossible to get dressed up by yourself. Now, legends have been told about these armors weighing 100 kilograms, and, well, knights being hoisted up in the air into the saddle. Well, this is a battle armor, not a tournament armor. The armors that were supposed to be really heavy were the 16th century tournament armors, in which you couldn't really move well. This is not used for tournaments, this is used for battles. So in this case, a knight had to move around easily. So this armor could not be too heavy, could not limit your movements. What's more, these armors were very light, in fact, as for metal armor, naturally, because the steel used back then was of a slightly different texture than today. It was beaten flat by a hammer, not by machines. So it was a little bit more porous, a little bit, well, the weight was not as big as today. So I got my shoulder blades, shoulder pads, or the pauldrons fastened on. Well, anything else. And the sword. The interesting thing about the sword, which I'm being given now, is its construction. Unlike the earlier blades, this one is much thinner, and the tip of the sword is very sharp. Why? Because apart from the regular slashing, it was used for thrusts. More and more thrusts and less slashing because of the armor. I mean, you can hit me as much as you want, it won't hurt me. But if you give me a nice little thrust in between the plates, you can kill me. You can even rip through the chainmail if you're strong enough. So again, more thrusts, less slashes. This sword is likely to evolve into a rapier in the next 200 years. Apart from that, what I'm going to have now is, yes, this is an element of chivalry. This signifies my rank as a noble knight. Apart from the spurs, it's one of the most important elements of a knight's dress. Pretty heavy, a little uncomfortable. So far I can survive. It doesn't weigh me down too much. See what I can do in it when it's all done. The helmet, hold on. Now, what makes this helmet much better than the pot helmet is the visor. You can lower it or you can lift it. So now I can see the whole view of the battlefield without having my face covered. Again, the shape is important. The lance, while hitting the face, goes to the side. That's why it looks a bit like a mouth of a dog. The Germans call it Hundskugel, which means the dog's mouth. Funny name, but a very useful type of helmet.
Breathe. Don't breathe. Breathe. Don't breathe.
And the gauntlets, ladies and gentlemen. These are the gloves, the gauntlets used masterpiece of a smith. And the shield. This is much smaller than it used to be, much shorter. I don't need to have a big kite shield like before because my legs are being well protected by the rest of the armor. And so, this is about enough. It bears the coat of arms here and a description, a motto, and now I'm ready to go for combat.